Back to another edition of the Ad Podcast. We've got an exciting guest for you guys today. George Musi is a premier global media, data, and analytics executive, most recently serving as the former chief business officer at Night Market. In the past 6 months, he has put together a portfolio of interesting companies working at the intersection of AI, data, and all of the interesting things that brands are trying to solve these days, spending a lot of time with private equity operators, portfolio companies, and deal makers trying to make sense of potential acquisition targets or how to integrate the companies that they've already acquired. While at Night Market, Horizon Media, a company focused on connected commerce, he was formerly the chief data analytics and insights officer at Blue 449 within the Publicis Media network prior. And he is recognized for his masterful ability to treat data as crude oil, arguing that it is entirely worthless unless refined, enriched, and turned into actionable business outcomes. Operating at the vanguard of AdTech transformation, George specializes in applying state-of-the-art AI, advanced analytics, and technology-enabled frameworks to modernize traditional agency business models and solve fragmented crises across retail media networks for CMOs trying to make sense of their data and their technology stacks. George, thanks so much for coming on, spending a little bit of time with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So I know I gave a little bit of context to, what you have been doing in agency land, but you've also broken out on your own and are doing some advisory work for PE firms and some exciting companies. But maybe if you could even take a step back and give us some context. So where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you get involved in the media agency marketing ecosystem?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I was born in Romania. Okay. My parents left during the communist era in a very frightening conditions, trying to escape. I told my kids the story, and they're like, "This should be a movie." And they came to this country. I was very young. I was, I think, 4 when I came here. So I consider myself born and raised in the United States of America because I don't really remember much, and maybe that's a good thing actually.
Yeah, right.
And then, believe it or not, I actually wanted to be a doctor. So all my life leading up to college, I was on the medical track, and I probably got that through my dad, which was he was the head veterinarian for the Romanian government. And then, as things in those types of countries shift, people backstab, and so he needed to get out quite quickly. Otherwise, he risked jail and potentially death. In that country, right? So I'm glad he did, and hopefully gave us a better life. But he gave up a lot. My mother and him gave up quite a bit for us to have a better life, and they try to give us everything. So I got to my dad, and then I kind of, which is weird, going through your whole life knowing what you really want to do, and then that kind of stops abruptly because my dad got sick, and I watched him. Unfortunately, die way too young, and it had a very lasting effect, and you can't unsee that, right? So I just lost my entire nerve because I couldn't get those images out of my head, right?
Being in hospital and kind of the medical process.
It was tough because it never faded me. It never faded me up to that point. Never had any issues. I don't care. I saw pretty much everything you can imagine. And you look at it and say, okay, what the hell, right? What am I going to do? And so I always loved the analysis part of investigation part, the discovery part, trying to kind of deconstruct to reconstruct. So I always had a passion for using data, which meant quite different 20 plus years ago versus what it means today. But the premise and the fundamental goal of it is still the same, right? Get information, get data, try to make sense out of it, and hopefully you find some things that are worthwhile, and then what do you do with them? So I was like, that's interesting. I can still take some of that and figure out what I could still pursue as a passion. So I went from that into applied business. right? And in there, it had really interesting parts. So it had like true quant, like statistics and mathematics, but it also had some really good, which I think maybe, or at least laid the foundation for kind of what I really saw myself doing, which is advising. So I did consumer psychology, I did cultural anthropology, right? Behavioral science, consumer science. So basically, the two things about use data to understand people in society, right? So brands can create better widgets that those consumers can buy, right? So if I simplify it, which is awesome, right? And then that type of approach transcends time, space, markets, right? So you can do that same thing anywhere in the world, which I did. So I really latched onto that, and then which meant completely different because I did that during before the internet. So what data meant back then were data capturing or data coding or quite different. I tell people in this generation, like, what exactly did you do? How did you do that, right? And so that was really, really challenging to do that at scale across the world. But I never lost the passion for data, advanced analytics, insights, and helping companies truly understand their market, their target market, where they sit within that market, and ultimately figuring out how business and ultimately marketing, right, should work together in a systematic way. Right. And those two things you have to understand, right? You have to understand the business, true side of the business, how they make money, how they don't make money, all that stuff that honestly in the marketing world or the communications world, they don't really focus a lot on, right? But the consultancies do quite a bit on, right? Which is where they make, but the marketing, which is all about creating incremental demand onto the business, you can't really do that well unless you understand the business. Right. And the business really needs to understand the role of marketing. So that was always my fundamental approach to using the core background and applying it. So as I started learning more, seeing more, and eventually worked my way from the research, analytics, advanced analytic consultancy world into the communications world through via GroupM, and then within their Mindshare. And then I started understanding this notion of what communications companies, or back then, I guess they would call communication company because it wasn't marketing services, and ultimately what kind of media was, which back then was all traditional. And then it started emerging as emerging digital. And you look at it and you're like, that's interesting, right? So you have these component parts of what creates this kind of demand, right? Which is audience, which is media, which is message experience. And so how do you kind of understand those and create those in a better way, right? So you can actually drive business. And then as the world evolved, I started evolving with it, understanding what component parts you would really amplify those component parts within the communication world. And I kept getting back to the same thing. My God, this notion of data is going to be critical. This notion of analytics will be even more critical. This notion of advanced analytics will probably be the tip of the spear, right? But most people back then were intimidated by it. They're like, well, yeah, just dumb it down, simplify it, right? Keep it in the back, right? And I always told myself that doesn't make any sense. This needs to be like the front. And so as I started getting more opportunities, more experience, I used to lead with that. And I used to tell the executives within the communications world, this is going to be key. Let me try to do this, right? You get pushback, you get resistance. Some would give me a chance and I would show them and they're like, oh my God, right? How do we scale something like this? And then eventually I realized that, well, you can actually build capability, solution, businesses, agencies, however you want to call them, on the back of something like this. So that's what I was always looking for, opportunities. But it's interesting because I went from wanting to be a doctor to a certain extent, still being a doctor, because sometimes I feel like I'm still diagnosing to try to fix, right? So different version of a doctor.
Cutting out tumors and the like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In our industry, it's notorious for a lot of even unseen diagnoses at this point. But yeah.
So then you spent some time within the Publicis network as well. So
Yeah.
you've visited a few of the big shops, Blue 449 within
Yep.
Publicis Media, and then found your way to Horizon, the world's largest independent media agency.
Yep.
Anything else notable in your background or
Yeah. So
resume we should touch on?
at Publicis is interesting because I went there when Publicis Media didn't exist, and they wanted to create like a competitor to Group M. So I was there when we pulled apart all the agencies, put them back together, created Publicis Media, created Blue 449, created Spark, right? Blew up MediaVest. So it was very interesting to see kind of the intricacies of how the revolving door or the musical chairs or whatever you want to call it was played out globally. But I also started realizing is, wait, they're trying to replicate something that exists today. That doesn't sound right. Like, why wouldn't we do something that is even more differentiated, still core to what we do? So we tried to build Blue 449 because I was one of the executives building it in a different way. Right? We tried to build it more on the back of true data science, true technology. And I do say AI because when people think AI is a new thing, and I tell them we were doing AI 30 years ago, they're like, that's impossible. I said, no, AI existed. Not we're able to scale it now because of the technology and the computing power that we have, but we were doing it back then.
Yeah, it was called
machine
learning, right? Or IBM's Watson.
Yeah. So people. So we had the foundations to do that. And then I also built Center of Excellencies at Publicis, so advanced analytics. I ended up running NINA and Emphasize, and then eventually I folded NINA into Emphasize as a Center of Excellence for advanced analytics. And then I found my way, I got recruited away from Publicis, not because I was happy. I was actually quite happy. That's why I spent so much time at the group, to go help build what eventually became IPG Health. At IPG, right? And so I ended up building a few different companies. One was called Solved, which was a data analytics company that also evolved into a media agency for healthcare, but true healthcare, not OTC, HCP, and true RX. And then I built. Yeah. Then I built a foundation for the data analytics that became the core intelligence layer for 45 agencies that sat within IPG Health. And that was really not ever done, at least for healthcare. I would argue probably not even for outside of healthcare at that scale, right? To really build something that powered 45 agencies, truly. A lot of holding companies say they did that. I would know who actually did that at that time. And nobody, but I credit at least IPG Health for giving me the opportunity and the investment to actually demonstrate, because you know it is, everything's a thesis unless you have the capability to prove it out. So we proved it out, and you know what, we were able to. And that's why I started the conversation about what I always wanted to do, outsmart. We were able to grow all the businesses because we were able to outsmart everybody. We used to go in a room and people were like, my God, you're the smartest agencies I've ever seen. And we kept getting that same feedback over and over across any agency we went in. Doesn't matter if we went in pitching creative or pitching experience or pitching media, we would do it almost the same exact thing. And we would get almost the same exact feedback. Right. And so we had something on, and I would hope that one of the reasons Omnicom acquired IPG was because of the IPG Health assets. And then I ended up at Horizon with Bill Koenigsberg because he wanted to build differentiated capabilities and get Horizon to be seen and known outside of just being the largest independent media planning and buying shop, which is what they were historically known for. So they wanted to get into retail and commerce like everybody else wanted to get into retail and commerce. They wanted to get into healthcare and life sciences like everybody else wants to get into retail, right? And which is understandable because that's where all the money is. And he wanted to build a core operating system, which is all the holding companies and to a certain extent, Horizon Media, although still independent, they're like a holding company now because it's beyond just Horizon Media.
Like the Blue platform and Blue Hour and Blue Studios, and
that's right. So
I had never even heard of your division, Night Market. So
that's right.
It shows you how many moving pieces there are.
That's right. So because what Bill understood at some point was, in order to compete in this day and age, given what large brands, even mid to enterprise brands and challenger brands want, is solutions. They want systems. They don't want silos, right? So when the pitches are coming, they're looking for systemic approaches to solving business problems. You can't do that with one component part. It just doesn't work anymore, right? And so they needed to create offerings that demonstrated they had what I told them that they really needed to have, was this notion to clearly demonstrate value across communication to commerce. So if you can demonstrate to any brand that you can do communication to commerce, and demonstrate how you can start here and end here, and show transparency, traceability, explainability, right? You got them hooked at that point. That's pretty much it right there, right? Because that's basically the system that a brand operates in. And so they're continuing that trajectory. It's hard because everybody claims to have an operating system. Everybody claims to have this. Everybody claims to have that within the holding companies. And every holding company now wants to be a platform. They no longer want to be a marketing services agency. They no longer want to do, right? Everybody's serving up platform and AI.
Yeah, you heard the WPP announcement saying that they wanted to, or that they were moving to become a SaaS company, and then
that's it.
Then they found themselves defending 7 pitches.
That's right. That's right. You got. Look, at the end of the day, you got. I get it. It's a self-inflicted wound for agencies. They completely degraded and marginalized the core thing that they did. Be it creative, be it media, be it whatever the case may be, right? And also their people. And so they're like, well, the clients are not paying us for that. Well, because you've allowed them, right? You are competing against each other. So if somebody says, I'll do it for 5% effective commission rate, well, I'll do it for 4. Okay, once you do that, you can't go back.
Yeah, my favorite story is when Kara took General Motors for 2 years, no fees.
Yep. That's right. But, which is nuts, right? So, but now you even have the latest Coke pitch, right? Going up again, right? And they're like, great AI technology, awesome. We expect all that stuff, right? How much cheaper can you give it to me? Which is right. Versus the other side of the coin, which you go to McKinsey, Bain, BCG, those types of companies, right? They compete against each other. And they compete against each other massively. They do. At no given time, will any of those companies go back and somebody will say, and they've tried, because I know the stories, and they say, well, look, McKinsey's willing to give it to me for this cheaper. Great. You should go work with McKinsey. And McKinsey never said that. And McKinsey would never do that, because nobody's going to drop the ball. They keep here because, not because they want to somehow create a monopoly, is because they fundamentally understand the value of what they provide. So they're not going to compromise on that integrity. They give or take here and there, but you're not going to go from where agencies were making 25, 28, 29, 30%, right? Not because they were charging for media, they were charging for thinking and strategy and insights and intelligence, right? The true value of what agency was bringing. Now it's 4%, like an average 4 to 5%. And so now they're trying to become platform companies. They're trying to become AI companies. They're trying to become SaaS companies. Why? Because they think they can regain revenue and margins, right? And at the same time, what they're doing is devaluing and demonstrating that in a clear way, the core thing that differentiated them to begin with, which is their people.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to watch. I always love Rashad Tabakawala's quote, which is
very, very much respectful.
Yeah, like, agencies aren't dinosaurs. We're not like dinosaurs. We're like cockroaches. We can survive nuclear bombs. and rise from the ashes. No matter how the world changes, we seem to adapt and figure out how to stick around. And I love your quote that we read in the bio. I wonder if you would unpack it a little bit. This idea of data as crude oil, arguing that it's worthless until refined, enriched, and turned into actionable business outcomes. It's funny. Oil was a dirty word. There were company there. I remember Edelman getting thrown under the bus because they represented big oil, and for a long time, there was kind of this association with oil as a bad thing. But I think probably in recent times, whether it's data centers or understanding how important a regional waterway like the Straits of Hormuz, in this new world, or what happened in Venezuela. I mean, at the end of the day, you need raw inputs in order to power the economy. And in the world of AI and media buying and fragmented channels and all the things that we're dealing with, you need the crude oil that powers the industry, which is data. So can you talk about the idea of refinement, enriching it, and then turning it into action?
Yeah, data was always the key thing that differentiated agencies, irrespective of which version of an agency. And somehow it became this kind of data that you can acquire, right? So data at scale, and then that was understandable because we had with the advent of digital, we had that access to more data at a faster pace than anybody knew what to do with. So then it really became, well, it's not really a data story anymore, and there's way too much of it, which I would argue is even worse now. The question is, how do you make sense of it? Right? And to the other more important thing, because this is probably the biggest killer in any business. It's the latency between data to insight to action. That's always been this notion, right? So then it becomes which data? Because it should be every data. Everybody assumes you need all the data. No, you don't. You need the relevant data, right? And the question is, how do you turn that into right? How do you refine that into usable, easily digestible intelligence, and then push that into the proper hands that can take it and do something with it? And can you scale what I just described? Okay. The other aspect of it now, I think, which becomes even more important, particularly in the advent of AI, which will commoditize all data, except the one that is proprietary, that sits in the heads of people, right? So you're hearing more and more about this notion of context, right? Data without context is meaningless. It's just meaningless, right? It's like having a human body without a brain. So context upon data gives meaning, gives life, right? That is the true refinement. The question is, where do you get that context? It's you and I.
Yeah, that's the human in the loop piece.
That's right. That's something that WPP tried to do when they came out and says, we've now codified 80,000 employees, right? That's what they were trying to do across all our businesses, across the 50, 60 years that we've had in our organization. And the reality, it sounds great on paper, but the problem is, how did you do that when you've lost 80% of your employees over that? Right, you shifted through all the employees. How do you can't go back in history and say, oh, we just tapped Dylan 15 years ago and we've captured his brain. So the ethos is correct, right? The fundamental approach and the practicality of what they're saying, there's a lot of flaws to it. But what the ethos of it is correct. Like, how do you now take the most relevant pieces of information? And the only way you can answer that is to understand the business that you're serving as an entity, as a system. And then the component parts of that business, which is brands. And then within those brands are products. Okay. And in there's target audiences, all those things. Then and only then can you basically say, okay, what pieces of information do I really need, both structured and unstructured in my mind, right? That I can then bring together purposefully and create structure and then train something, AI, based on that information. Then and only then do you gain something that is truly proprietary, true IP, something that cannot be replicated by anybody. You cannot buy any of that. It's impossible to buy. It's impossible to replicate. And that is where every agency, every brand should aspire for. So this notion of data, insight, action, that relationship is still the most critical thing in the world. Right? Assume everybody has access to the same data you can pay for. Assume everybody has access to the same technology. Assume everybody has access to the same fundamental models, which is true, right? Everybody has access or renting, right? The same foundation. Great. So if anybody at any given time can buy anything, then it's not defensible. It's not differentiated. So how do you then differentiate yourself? Well, once you have the right pieces of information, your historical knowledge, both that you have and then that sits in people's heads, plus the client's information, same thing that they have, whatever they want to call it, CRM, website traffic, plus in their heads. And you can combine those pieces of information. You can wrap not one AI, but multiple purposely built models, each with a different purpose in a systemic way. That means they're not individualized. They're purposely built to connect with each other. That delivers true intelligence, true insights back to the individuals that need it the most, and that can leverage it so they can shorten this distance between opportunity, right, and taking that opportunity. So now you're discovering at a faster pace, at a much more deeper pace, and then you are decisioning much faster with much more clarity, with much more conviction, would drive a lot more confidence, right? Confidence that you're making the right decisions, confidence that those decisions are going to actually drive business value, and then you can improve that. That was always this notion of how do you take data, refine it into something that is useful, and in my definition of useful, it has impact into either the top line revenue or the bottom line margin, ideally both. And how do you do that much faster, much smarter, so you're not missing opportunity? That is what everybody's trying to do today. So everything that everybody's talking about AI, that is fundamentally the thing that everybody's trying to get to and trying to differentiate on.
Yeah, I love the idea of speed being kind of the ultimate unlock. You know, I talked to a company that does AI, they call it market orchestration or marketing orchestration yesterday. And they told me about a bank client that they had that used to take 6 weeks to launch a campaign. Now it takes them 6 hours. And, you know, just because you can launch campaigns in that much less time doesn't mean you should launch, you know, a campaign every day or a campaign every 6 hours. Yep. But it allows you to, like you said, use data to come up with a thesis and come up with an insight, a human insight, because at the end of the day, it's, at least for today, it's still humans buying things from humans. And then you can deliver that thesis into the world much faster than you could in the past. And you can get that feedback loop almost instantly versus having to wait for market signals to tell you if your experiment worked. So there's
a company I'm working with. They're working with an agency, large independent agency, and they have a proprietary product. It used to take them on average something like 35 to 40 hours to reproduce one cycle of that, right? So basically a week working full time, right? And so this AI company went in, deconstructed everything, reconstructed it, and now it takes them 5 minutes right? So definitely. But here's the other thing: it also unlocked, discovered, brought to the surface, whatever version of that you want to call it, 30 to 35% more insights that agency didn't even know existed sitting in that same data.
That's wild.
Right? So I hear you, and so that to me is the power of something. Like they're like, whoa, hold up a second. What did you include in here? They're like, we didn't include anything. This is just the same information. The AI models can see it in such multidimensional ways that a human being only works on one dimension. It's impossible. AI models work on all these different dimensions, right? And they're like, this is not only do we do it faster, but do we do it smarter? So that's the power, right? And then the person, which is what is meant to do, then the person becomes enlightened and empowered to make different decisions, better decisions, faster decisions, which is what AI's strength is supposed to be, which is an enhancer, an enabler, not a taking away of people, right? But making those people see things, do things that couldn't be done before.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. I love that thinking. So let's talk about the conundrum. You know, the traditional agency holding company built their empire on billable hours, manual execution, and massive operational headcount. We've talked about we've both cited examples that took things weeks, hours, and days now being done in minutes or much less time frame. As artificial automates things from client reporting, creative asset versioning, how should the fundamental agency business model adapt and change, or will they be forced to shift from time-based pricing to value-based outcomes based on the idea that you can't, you know, if something takes 6 minutes and it used to take you 6 days, how do you draw your compensation from something like that? On an agency that used to be on a model that used to be based on time spent.
So this notion of FTAE and the agency world is interesting. So if you go back all the way back in the early days, and even you use the Mad Men kind of a series as an example. Right? If you look at the way the value that they provide, which is all supposed to be representative of the engine, which is true. Right. I remember a lot of those situations. It was never about hours. It was always about impact. Right. You go to somebody like that because, oh my God, they can uncover the insight or insights, right? That can create strategy and then implement that strategy, which will have massive impact. Great. That's valuable to me. Right? If that costs me $500,000, right? The agency has to go back and say, for us to do that, this is what it will cost. Right? If it costs us more, that's on us. Right? If we understand. If you're changing the parameters way too much, scope creep, it's a different conversation. Right? Somehow it went into, and because the agency world became siloed, disciplines became fragmented, right? Too many component parts, too many center of excellencies, too many specializations. Everybody had a P&L. And the only way to make the mathematics works in a spreadsheet, right, was find me a common denominator that can work across all those things. Oh,
time.
Billable hour. Right? Time. Yeah. That's the most common denominator across all those things, right? Great. How much time is Dylan? How much time should we charge for Dylan, right? Well, it's $40, whatever it is, right? $50, $500, whatever, right? And it became that. And then time, but then they reconstructed that time into an effective commission rate, which was the thing that became the undoing of the agency. This notion of time is in itself is not flawed. So it takes time to produce certain things. Yes, this notion of time means something different in this version of AI. Okay. If it took me 10 hours to produce magic, now it takes me 5 minutes to produce magic. Does that mean I should charge you 95 to 98% less because I produced magic? No, right? Producing quality, true quality, should be valued at the thing that ultimately it should be valued at, which is it produces quality. Now, if you're talking about quantity, I can produce many assets. I can produce, right? Just churn and burn. I can understand that. Like, why should I pay your people whatever it is on an hourly rate when AI can do that in 80% less time? There's not much value there. That's just churn and burn work. That I understand, right? So those are the kind of the operations of. But the true value should not be like, oh, it took you X hours, now it takes you X hours. No. It should be really, look, I can produce true impactful work. What I do, the people that I have, empowered in a different way to produce that level of impact in the marketplace. The value of that is still this, right? You have to value it at that. The rest of the stuff I get, I understand. Creative versioning, all that stuff, I get that, right? So yes, that needs to be revisited, re-understood, and discussed where it makes sense for the agency and it makes sense for the brand in that relationship. Where the true value of the agency was insight, finding the way to understand marketplaces and pull that in, strategy, right, and impact. That should not be cheapened. And that's where the agencies, when they went into that FTE model, and then they used the FTE model to go into an effective commission rate. And then, media agencies eventually, not all of them, but at least the major holding companies went into principles-based media buying, right, as a way to offset some of the other stuff that they did to themselves. It becomes this notion of, well, if you open the door for the brands and the procurement people in that brands, then yeah, they should take full advantage of that. Yeah, no, it took you X, now it takes you Y. I want to see the savings in that, right? Versus saying no. Yes, these things, but never these things, right? And they just happen to throw everything in there. So I think this notion of, I think the notion of, it still takes time to produce. It might take less time, but the ultimate notion is impact. That impact creates value. So I think it's going to be, which it should have always been, is this notion, look, it's going to take me this amount of money, time. I got to pay my people. I got to cover my overhead. I got to make profit, right? This is what the formula to produce this level of impact in the marketplace. Great. The other relationship of it is, okay, if I produce impact into the marketplace, I should be rewarded.
Yeah.
Right. So, I should be rewarded for that impact.
Yeah.
Now,
having some skin in the game, so to speak.
So here's the opposite, because we can't be overcritical of agencies, because you have to be also overcritical on brands. Every procurement person, every brand says, yeah, we want performance-based, outcome-based. And then when they see it, and when the agency under agreed upon terms and conditions delivers on it, every single brand, every single procurement people will look for a way out. So you're like, wait, I can't.
It's like what they called Hollywood accounting in the entertainment industry, right?
So you can't say, oh, you guys did too well. Wait, hold up a second, right? You should be super excited that I did that well, right? That I've over-delivered, right? And in a grand scheme of things, of what I've over-delivered versus what I'm asking for, business-wise, right? It should it's like a decimal point, it's a rounding error internally in the brand. Right? So it's a really interesting relationship, right? Because right now I think it's very lopsided in favor of brands. So what the agencies are trying to do now is re-architect everything that the agencies do and how they ultimately make money, right? So that's why every agency is trying to transform themselves into an AI company, a technology company, a platform company, because they see the money that those companies are making, the multiples that they're making, the margins that they're making, and they're like, well, I want to be that, right?
Yeah.
And so they wanted extremely difficult to do when you're still trying to service the same things that you're servicing before: creative, media, experience, audiences. Now, you can own more of the technology, you can own more of the widgets, you can own more of the plumbing, right? Because you can say, well, if I own a lot of those things, I can make money from all those things. Great. Okay. But then you can't really call yourself an agency anymore, right? Because the word agent was always a fiduciary on behalf of a brand, on behalf of a brand, not on behalf of the agency, on the behalf of the brand. So all the agencies that do principle-based buying, that own technology, right, that own a lot of the component parts of the ecosystem, they should not be called agencies anymore. They should be called something else, right? Maybe they're called consultancies. Maybe they're called technology companies. I don't know. Maybe they are called platforms. I don't know. But they're definitely not agents on behalf of brands anymore.
Yeah, because the agent model, as taken from, the Hollywood talent agent, is that your job is to negotiate the best deal on behalf of your client, and
That's right.
There shouldn't be any other outside forces weighing in
That's
on
right.
your agreement, and there shouldn't be any side deals or anything else to pollute that relationship between agent and client. Yeah, interesting. All right. You've spent years building advanced analytics practices that act as a strategic advisor for enterprise media buying. Programmatic platforms have long used basic levels of automation, but how does deeply embedding neural networks change media planning from historical rear view mirror optimization into true predictive budget allocation? What happens to the trader who used to spend their whole day in Excel?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the true power of AI, and I would argue, which is quickly coming upon that, quantum computing. Traders, our industry loves to steal stuff from other industries, right? And in this case, the financial services, right?
Yep.
And so you look at traders that walk on Wall Street now, right? Their jobs have become all about making sure that they leverage all the tools of technology to extract the maximum value for every dollar invested into the marketplace, right? That means highest yield of return, right? Which is what they're bonused on at the end of the day, right? Make more money for your clients, you'll make more money. Great. However you want to do that, that's on you, right? So if you want to spend 90% in Excel, congratulations. But if you want to spend 5% in Excel and let AI do all the other stuff, right? Awesome. So I think it should make the traders, right, more like what they were supposed to be doing, which is trading, quickly understanding, quickly recalibrating, quickly reclassifying, redistribution across the trifecta, right, of what needs to happen: audience, message, channel. Right, that is the relationship in this day and age, right? And an audience in this day and age, right, you have to be very specific. Is it a human or is it an agent? Because now you need to be able to differentiate between those two, because you have to convince both of those things at the same time now, right, to include you into consideration set. So it should ultimately provide a lot more impact and opportunity for the trader to actually be trading. Because I think before the advent of AI, they were not trading. I mean, they were trying to crunch. They were spending way, way too much time, right, trying to pull, understand, right, because all these things sat within all these fragmented places. And by the time they got to a place where they aggregated, they cleansed, they QA'd, they consolidated, they understood, right, where and how they need to make trade-offs. And they used to call it real time, and the reality is there was nowhere close to that, right? Nowhere close to that. And so you missed all this opportunity in the marketplace because that's not the way the world shifted and worked, right? So, and none of them had true quantitative quantum capabilities within agency world, right? Each one of them relied on the platform. So in order to circumvent the latency time to value, right, they would over invest into the individual platforms that they invested in, right? So they relied on a Meta, on a Trade Desk, all those guys, right? Without really understanding what the hell was going on, right? Over reliance with super lack of transparency is not a really good relationship in that area, right? So I think now it should give all the traders and honestly the entire programmatic ecosystem a lot more transparency, a lot more explainability, a lot more auditability, and a lot more control, right? Into understanding, making decisions, and allocating funds into the places and spaces that will ultimately extract the maximum yield for every dollar invested on behalf of the brand, right? So this notion of predicting, that's not a new thing. I mean, that predictive analytics, right, has been around for 30 years. It's not, the models have changed. They become more sophisticated. There's definitely more of them. I would argue what AI enables to do under these scenarios, particularly with agents, is it allows you to work on the edge, right? So if you work on the edge, it shortens the latencies between understanding, recalibrating, and doing at the same time, right? So that is what true quantitative, right, understanding and recalibration happens. That's the way it works on Wall Street today, right? That's how they can push that much volume and have that much clarity and confidence and conviction in decision making. That notion can be applied to the same trade desks within all the holding companies, all the independent agencies, whatever the case may be. But it requires them to really work on the edge. It's not really predictive analytics. It's not descriptive analytics. It's more leaning towards prescriptive analytics. But the only way to do that is to work on the edge, right? Understand, pull data, keep it in the places and spaces, right? Reduce the latency between pulling information, all this information, combining with other pieces of information is really understanding data that you need to understand at the time that you need to understand it, refine it quickly, make the analysis, make the decisions about audience, message, and channel, and recalibrate it in milliseconds, right? But you still have the true understanding, you still have true control, you still have true explainability, transparency, and auditability in that equation. So if you want to stop it, you can stop it. If you want to go, you can go, right? So that is where I think it redistributes the power back to the humans.
Generative AI has effectively made the production of ad copy, in some cases videos, display assets, free, instant, and infinite. However, you've cautioned that data and model shouldn't overrule human instinct. In a world facing an explosion of AI-generated content, how do agencies prevent their clients' marketing messages from turning into a rush to the middle or generic synthesized digital noise that completely alienates the end consumer? I know my kids, they say when they see AI on TV or in social media, they call it out as if it is a bad thing. There's a new generation of consumer that I think revolts when they see AI content. I'd be curious on how you think AI should be deployed in the creative process.
So if the three component parts are still the ones that make true impact in a marketplace and communications, an audience, a message, a channel, right? All come together to create an experience that influences somebody to think and behave differently and take action, right? That is ultimately the end state. Generative AI, right? It was like dynamic. It was like DCO compared to DCO. Where DCO came out, oh, we can do versioning, we can change these things around, right? But it's okay. It's just a template, right? It just moved things around assets. So that's why most display and arguably most video that went through DCO had a half-life of 5 seconds. Nobody remembered it, right? That's the whole notion. This notion of creative, right? It's called communication for a reason. The whole fundamental purpose of it is to communicate, to distribute information to individuals that find that information relevant so they can pull that information, understand it, and make decisions. So generative AI dilutes this notion of creating relevant content. What generative AI, although it's powerful, what it does is dilutes everything into the most simplistic things, right? Ones and zeros. It overrides this notion of how you connect with humans. Now, you can make an argument that it makes sense to use generative AI to connect with a bot or an agent, machine to machine. I can understand that. I can appreciate that because you're not communicating to a human being. At least there is no awareness. It has not gone sentient. It has no emotion. Although you could maybe claim that some of these things are starting to understand, but it's not. You're still it's still a bot to a bot at the end of the day. But if you're going to communicate to humans, which are very sophisticated human beings, right? Creatures that don't do what they say and say and don't do, right? We act completely irrational, right? You expect somebody to say something or do something and experience something and appreciate, nope. And then you expect somebody to like, this is never going to work, and it explodes, right? Why? Hold up a second. That didn't make sense. None of our research, none of it. Yeah, because you're trying to understand a human being that is impossible to understand, right? All you can do is try to get as much information to create a scenario where the human being will, oh, that's interesting, right? I think that is very interesting. So if you over engineer the creative and allow AI to try to say, well, AI can access information and can translate it and can understand much quicker. What it can't understand, at least not to this day and age, it can't. It's impossible. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Is emotion, irregularities, irrationalities, right? Passion, anger, fear, right? All those things. And if you look at all the successful creatives, messages throughout history, right? All of them. What did they all do? It was all emotional. None of it was rational. It was all emotional, right? People are like, oh my God, right? It hits, it hurts, right? It makes you think, it makes you ponder, it stops you, right? Technology can't capture that, at least not yet, right? So if you're over engineering it, then it's gonna come out exactly the way it is, which is you're washing away the true differentiation of what really captures human beings, really stops human beings, really pulls human beings into a narrative, right? Into a conversation that they want to be part of, an experience that they value. AI can't do that. So therefore, if you over rely on that, then people are going to tune out. They're going to know quite quickly, like this generation coming up, they know that. My kids are the same way. They know exactly what it is, right? So like all things, I think our industry is over-indexing on that very much, right? And now quickly they have to deal with the backlash of that. Now, what they've also done in that process is says, oh, we don't need creatives anymore. We don't need that many creatives. We don't need that many strategists. We don't need that many. And now what they're realizing is, oh my God, in the actuality is actually we need more of them.
Yeah, because you need good inputs. With the rise of AI search engines and answer engines like Google AI Overview, Perplexity, the traditional blue link SEO playbook is rapidly declining. When consumers signal direct AI synthesized answer instead of clicking to a website, how does a brand discovery and search engine marketing strategy evolve to remain part of the conversation when people are, I think it's 60% of all searches now don't return with a click.
That's right.
And then you for the first time in a long time have a fragmentation of where people go when they have a question.
Yep.
Google used to have a monopoly on where people went when they had a question.
That's
and
right.
Now there's a lot more options.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what you have historically is Google did the one thing that needed to be done, which is index the World Wide Web information. Great. And it became a Q&A. So that's what Google is, right? I have a question. You give me an answer. In its simplest terms, right? Google can say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it's a Q&A, right? Question, answer. Great. What consumers want is more than that. So consumers over the years, even before OpenAI and advert of that, right? You would try to have a conversation with Google. No, it's actually not right. I want this, right? and the problem is, but Google can't index at that pace. It's impossible. So the search queries will come back the same way. Same structure, same prioritized, same everything. And you're like, well, maybe they don't understand what I'm saying. No, they actually exactly understand what you're saying. They're just not going to change because they can't change. So you can't have a conversation. What now you have is a conversation. You're having a conversation with a technology that says, well, what are you trying to do? Well, this is what I want to do. I want to buy a car. Oh, really? Oh, where do you live? How old are you? We have kids, right? Oh, okay. Well, I can see that you live here. I can see what cars have you bought in the past? Where did you go up to this point? What do you like? What do you don't like? So now you're having a conversation, and every time you're Q&A and prompting, input, output, right? In Google is one dimensional, one input to one output. In conversational, it's inputs to outputs. At the same time, the system is learning, adapting, reconstructing, understanding, right? Sometimes it understands the wrong way, and sometimes it gives you bad answers that sound really, really right, but it learns.
Yeah.
The hallucination factor. But most time for consumers, what you're doing now is having a conversation about a need or a need state, right? And you now have a system of information that you walk out with, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. I am fully knowledgeable about the thing that I was trying to do. And actually have more knowledge now and probably understood more things and gotten access to more things that I ever would have known. Great. So that becomes a conversation inside a completely different environment. So you've moved away from a Q&A into a conversational atmosphere. Right? I don't think consumers are ever going to move away back. I don't think consumers will ever go back to that. It's like once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Once you've experienced it, it's impossible. So that is only going to grow as you see it, right? It's only growing and it's only going to become more. That has the full capacity and capability in a systematic way to deliver true communication to commerce. Forget about the ads on OpenAI. That's like the first display ads that happened, right? But it's not going to take 10 years for it to become what it is today. It's probably going to take a year for that to become really immersed into that environment. So if the AI agent is the one that is asking you questions, which Google never did, it is taking those questions and answering, going back, refinement. Ultimately, it is the discovery engine is going to now decide what it surfaces to you, right? So now, forget about share of search. It's share of model. It's share of AI, right? So I have this equation that goes from share of mind, right, to share of model, to share of choice, which then leads to share of market, right? So that is the new fundamental thing that you have to understand is how does a brand no longer need to influence Google? It needs to influence OpenAI, Perplexity, Gemini, right? All the foundational models. It needs to influence them because if those models are having the conversations with consumers, a true conversation, right, back and forth, which it is, and it is becoming the one that is recommending, right, which consumers now value more because why wouldn't they? It's been a back and forth conversation, right? And now you're based on everything you're offering.
It feels like having a conversation with a trusted expert or a friend.
That's right.
Or a lady at the beauty counter, or
That's right.
somebody on the customer service, and it also feels objective because you're not interacting directly with the brand, at least not.
Correct. So then the question is, knowing that it's no longer type and click. Okay. How does a brand now natively introduce themselves into that conversation, right? And it's going to be similar yet dissimilar to how brands introduce themselves into the creator economy, right? Because the creator is like the AI agent. I mean, that's people ask me like, what's a comparable? It's like the creator economy, right? I'm the creator, but what now the creators realize that they have all the power. So the creator is not just the creator. It is the ecosystem. It decides who to let in, which brand, right? It decides what to say. It decides what to recommend to all the people that are there to listen, to understand the value and input. So how does a brand natively access beyond just sponsorship, right? How do you make the brand native to that conversation where the creator doesn't feel forced. It feels native to who they are. The AI agent ultimately works in the same capacity that it should be in the service of the consumer. So everything that you said, it should be all about you. That's why I'm asking all these questions, right? So I can understand all this context, so I can present something that is relevant to you. I'm doing all the heavy lifting for you. I'm going from 1,000 to 3 or to 2 for you, right? Oh, that's great. So how does a brand or the 20 brands or the 40 brands or whatever it is that could be in that consideration set, how do they ensure that the model considers them, surfaces them under the conditions that always make sense, right? A brand will say, well, I make sense for every old conditions. So I go back to the thing is, how do brands capture share of model? Right? And they have to understand the way their websites work, the way the communications work, because remember all the foundational models, the world models are all trained on the World Wide Web. So the way you have created websites, microsites, experiences, UI, UXs, right, all have to change. All of it. Right? And Google's not stupid. Google, because they're not going to disrupt their ad business because that's their bread and butter. But be it whatever they say at the end of the day. Maybe that'll change in 15 years from now, when they go data centers to cloud. But that's where they're pushing as fast as possible into Gemini, because they understand this notion, right, that the old way of working is no longer relevant, right? So they need to be able to make sure that they are still the 800-pound gorilla in at least the discovery and the distribution. Discover information, distribute information.
Yeah. Well, if you think about if Google uses Gemini, not necessarily for the place in which they serve ads, but where they
Yep.
where they can collect context on consumers. You
Yep.
know, one of the things that I've done recently is I've given Gemini access to all of my Google accounts, you know, not just my Google accounts, but my documents, my calendar, my photographs, you know, I've given them access to everything because I want to be able to say, like, if a client says, "Hey, what'd you do in the last 30 days?" I can go in and say, "Hey, look at my calendar and tell me what I did in the last 30 days." And then I've
Yep.
got a report, right? So,
Yep.
you give Google more and more access. Google has better and better data. And then when I go on YouTube and spend 3 hours in front of the TV at night, oh my gosh. I mean, I've never seen more like Google, based on the YouTube ads that I see, AI tools, things for the creator economy, how to edit
Yep.
my podcast. I mean, it's like the most specific, possible video ads that I've ever seen, with high production value,
Yep.
And, so I think, and then what's also like crazy is, you used to have this issue with YouTube where, you had parents with kids, you didn't know if the kid is watching
Yeah.
like, Google knows or YouTube knows that when I'm watching TV at night, it's me, and when I'm sitting my kid in front of dinosaur stuff during the day, it's him. Like they don't have that problem anymore of like who's into what account and where. So I think Google having always been this just amazing ecosystem of harvesting data to make their ad products more effective when you encounter their ad products, I think is only going to get better and stronger. So I agree with you. Google's by no means, on the outs in this new world.
Yeah, no, they're just, originally they were hesitant to say that this was, but this is the reality, right? I mean, it's scaled AI, Anthropic, OpenAI. It's scaled faster than anything we've ever seen in our lives, and it's not slowing down. Active monthly users is ridiculously, right? It's blowing past every estimate possible, right? That is what, and that, so consumers are going to dictate, and they're dictating quite quickly, right? So the Google legacy is just a matter of time, right? But Google is not going to give up, and nor should they give up, because they have a faster starting point, they have larger scale, they have all the component parts. They'll adapt, right? Doesn't mean that OpenAI, Perplexity are not going to, right, take shares of that, which they will, right? I have no doubt about that, which is great, because I think that will ultimately get us closer to what we hoped when information was being shared or collected, which is just if you're going to understand me, then serve me relevancy. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. And that wasn't the case, honestly. It was actually quite the opposite of that. You were getting nonsense from, you're like, that's crazy. You don't know me. You're supposedly collecting all this information, but you don't know me.
Either nonsense or repetitiveness, a frequency trap where you felt like, like even after you converted, you felt like, you were just getting smothered by this brand.
Yeah, it's just, and honestly, it still happens. I bought a car recently for my kids, and from a deal, and to this day, last April, I'm still getting ads from that dealership to come buy the same car. It's crazy.
Yeah, you'd think they'd figure out how to spend their money better. Well, George, appreciate you spending some time with me in the audience today. Fascinating conversation. Glad we had a chance to hang out and spend some time. If folks want to reach out, connect with you, follow along with your thinking, where would you like to direct the audience?
Yeah, just hit me up on LinkedIn. That's my primary way for all the content or all the things that I share. If people want to hit me up there. If you want to email me, it's george.musi@outlook.com.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for coming on and spending some time with the audience.
I appreciate
today.
it.
And for those of you who are watching of course, man. And then for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or subscribe. if you're listening, an honest review on whatever podcast platform that you're listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. If there's somebody out in agency land, or maybe a brand marketer is willing to figure out this brave new world that we're living in this AI revolution, or maybe a private equity person who's trying to make sense of their portfolio acquisition strategy or what to buy next, don't forget to share the show. And with that, we will wish you a great day.